If it all ends like this, why bother? That's the single biggest question hovering over HBO's Game of Thrones prequel House of the Dragon. Bigger than will the show be good or will it respect the source material, the question is, why should I care about this world when I know that what it's leading to is a 6-episode character assassination speedrun designed to violate its own setups and swap out its living, breathing world with a taxidermied corpse in the hopes that no one notices? And the answer is IDK. But since I would like to K, I'm going to spend this video exploring the idea of canon and pondering its importance. How about American Psycho, huh? Great little movie. Pitch perfect satire of Wall Street culture, a little black comedy, little surreal horror, and more than a little meme potential. Every line of it is written and delivered with acute purpose, and it's remembered as one of the best films of the 2000s. Did you know American Psycho has a sequel? Yeah. So in 2001, Lionsgate was working on a movie called The Girl Who Wouldn't Die. Production had already ended when some executive realized that Lionsgate could make more money if they rebranded The Girl Who Wouldn't Die as a sequel to their most recent hit, American Psycho. A little voiceover was added to explain that this guy, who the protagonist kills in the opening scene, was actually Patrick Bateman. And just like that, American Psycho 2 became the official canon sequel to American Psycho. Mila Kunis has gone on record saying she had no idea she was making an American Psycho sequel. And yet it is, because Lionsgate had the legal rights to the IP. End of story. Except nobody cares, so why not? Why don't fans of the original pen hour-long critiques about how it ruined their favorite movie? By what metric do we distinguish between illegitimate sequels and legitimate ones? You could say it's IP rights. I mean, without those, every Wattpad fanfic holds the same degree of validity as the original material, but then you're forced to acknowledge that Christian Bale's Patrick Bateman gets hacked to death by a random tween girl immediately after the credits roll, and factor that into your assessment of what the otherwise genius character represents. Same for Alien 3, all the Halloween sequels, you get the picture. So then maybe you say only sequels that were part of the original vision, but then you're writing off stories like Breaking Bad, which sort of freestyled it, but still managed to be good. So then maybe you ask, why can't we just keep the good sequels and disown the bad ones? What's wrong with that approach? To which I would say, a lot, actually. For one, that's just going to differ from person to person, which makes it impossible to have conversations about stories because you can't agree on the canon. And also, what about a single bad episode in a show or series, but that episode still progresses the plot in a meaningful way and delivers payoffs that were set up in prior good episodes? You can't just ignore the bad. You'd have to create a headcanon that reworked and contradicted the source material. And at that point, why bother? You're clearly not invested with what is happening on the screen, just what could be happening on the screen. And then you could go with the stance that it's all fictional, therefore canon doesn't matter, which would make you sus and cringe. But my personal opinion on this is that there's only one reasonable metric for determining canon, and that's the endorsement of the original creator. I'm a firm believer that art requires intent. I don't find the notion that random natural structures fall into the same category as La Pietà, inspiring, encouraging, or otherwise productive in any way. It's like saying the input of human genius means nothing because we're all just floating in vibe land and it's all subjective and, oh, you're depressed? Yeah, I wonder why. And if art requires intent, then the intent of the artist isn't something that can be written off as just another opinion. It matters. Therefore, the original creative team has the unique ability to decide what's canon and what's not, even if that act entails a little more than a thumbs up in the direction of a new creative team. A bit flimsy? Yeah, I know, but it means that when Robert Zemeckis dies and Hollywood pillages his grave for the Back to the Future rights and makes the fourth installment that he's been firmly against for decades, I get to say no, and I get to explain why. But we're talking about an adaptation, and that's a whole nother melon. Assuming you felt the way I and most people did about Game of Thrones Season 8, you probably hoped another show based on the same source material would distance itself. But when the promotional images and teasers started rolling in, I think we all realized that that was a ridiculous thing to want. This is HBO we're talking about. This is a mega corporation taking a calculated risk on the continuation of an IP that failed on a basic consumer satisfaction level. Turning to self-aware meta-humor wasn't an option, tonally speaking, so there was really just one choice they had to make. Do we adapt the source material as if Game of Thrones never existed, or do we repurpose every prop, every set, and every leitmotif to ensure the audience that this is the same Westeros they once loved? I suppose if you're a studio executive, that's a no-brainer. House of the Dragon Episode 1 kicks off with a text block that directly references Emilia Clarke's Daenerys. It comes right out of the gate screaming, "I am a Game of Thrones prequel. I exist in the same TV universe as Dany kind of forgot." And I find it funny, because I'm sure HBO does know how badly they fucked up. Like, Game of Thrones had a writing-savvy fanbase. I think, pound for pound, the most writing-savvy fanbase of any show ever. You look at the comments under an early Game of Thrones clip, it's people analyzing the script word for word, admiring the raw brilliance of its dialogue, because oftentimes there was nothing else. Just two people in a room. I got sucked right into it. I became a better writer because of this show, but it was an international super hit too, so the viewer base also consisted of less writerly types, people who just wanted to root for their favorite players and immerse themselves in a uniquely thrilling fantasy world. And whereas most high-profile storytelling implosions create a rift between what I'll call, for lack of a better term, the thinkers and the feelers, Game of Thrones pissed them both off simultaneously. The thinkers saw Daenerys become a genocidal maniac overnight and said that makes no sense and defies the established logic of her character, and the feelers saw Daenerys become a genocidal maniac overnight and said, I don't like this, why is my girl doing this? I don't want to watch this show anymore. And just like that, Game of Thrones evaporated from the public consciousness. I'm sure the decision to resurrect GOT's production design was an easy one, but I mean easy in the same way that choosing to repair an almost totaled car is easy. And yet, there is one moment in the premiere that goes above and beyond this dutiful corporate peddling and makes me think HBO might actually want to redeem the original show. Towards the end of the episode, Viserys I tells Rhaenyra about the Long Night and the White Walkers and how only a Targaryen can defeat them, which is laughable considering what actually happens, but also completely unnecessary. Rhaenyra's character from Fire and Blood is perfectly functional without this, but it was added, very deliberately, like they were trying to connect the two shows on a deeper thematic level after everything. And do you know what the worst part is? Episode 1 of Fire and Blood is awesome. It's a superbly written, close-quarters family drama that reminds me of early GOT. The scenes with Viserys especially are brilliant, almost as brilliant as King Robert's. Care is taken to ground the story in ancient values, the dissolution of which was, to me, an under-hated aspect of Season 8. I believe that this guy obsesses over the idea of having a male child. His emotions make sense to him and the culture he's a part of. Fuck relating to characters. This is miles ahead of that. This is real empathy, understanding the thoughts and feelings of someone with a completely different frame of reference. And they're even doing the incest. I can't believe I'm saying that's a good thing, but I am. It shows a willingness to let the show exist in its own ethical bubble. But every time I hear the Targaryen theme, or I see the sigils, or the title font, I'm reminded of how desperate this show is to justify the sunk costs of its predecessor, and how that show is canon to this show whether I like it or not, and it's annoying because all they had to do was keep it vague. Don't reference GOT, but don't outright contradict it. Simple. But that was never going to happen. And any further commitment to refurbishing their former crown jewel could come back to bite HBO in the ass, condemning this otherwise good show to death. But what do you think?
Your